Most people no longer read the heavens through brass instruments. But every day, they still wake up and do something structurally similar. They check the map. They check the weather panel. They check the dashboard. They check the screen. They trust the formatted version of reality before they trust direct encounter with reality itself. And that is not a small modern habit. It is one of the deepest civilizational patterns human beings have ever built. Because long before glowing screens and digital panels, people were already doing something similar with the world around them. The sky was too large to grasp directly. Its motions were too vast, too slow, too complex to hold all at once. So human beings found the patterns, turned them into number, turned number into geometry, turned geometry into tools, and those tools became interfaces. That is the long background to the modern world. The tools changed. The pattern did not. And once you see that, a harder question begins to emerge. Why do human beings keep trusting reality more when it has been turned into an interface? Why does a map often feel more usable than the land? Why does a dashboard feel more decisive than the machine behind it? Why does a weather panel shape behavior faster than the sky outside? Why do formatted signals so often feel more actionable and sometimes even more real than the raw world they came from? The answer begins with a simple fact. Raw reality is too much. Too much scale. Too much motion. Too much uncertainty. Too many variables at once. Too many things changing together for a human being to absorb in a single glance. That is not a flaw in the world. It is the condition of being a finite creature inside a reality that exceeds your scale. Human beings cannot live efficiently by absorbing totality every moment. So civilization keeps returning to the same solution. Compression. Take what is too large to hold directly. Find the relevant pattern. Reduce complexity. Arrange it into readable form. And build a surface through which action becomes possible. That is what an interface really is. Not just a screen. Not just a panel. Not just a piece of software. An interface is a designed surface between overwhelming reality and usable action. It selects. It arranges. It highlights. It hides what is less immediately useful. It creates a point of contact between the human being and a larger system. And that is why interfaces become so powerful. Because they do not only show reality. They stage reality for use. That difference matters. A raw storm system is one thing. A weather panel is another. A continent is one thing. A map is another. An engine in motion is one thing. A dashboard is another. The interface is not the full thing, but it is the thing organized for action. And human beings are drawn to that again and again because action matters more in ordinary life than totality. That is one of the oldest bargains civilization ever made. We accept reduced reality in exchange for usable reality. And most of the time, that bargain works. That is why interface trust is not foolish by default. It is necessary. Without compression, many forms of life become unmanageable. Imagine trying to navigate unfamiliar terrain without a map. Imagine trying to monitor a machine without indicators. Imagine trying to move through a complex city without signs, routes, or interfaces. Imagine trying to coordinate daily life while refusing every formatted signal. Very quickly, complexity becomes exhausting. So the interface solves a real human problem. It reduces overwhelm. It organizes perception. It gives priority to what seems most actionable. It allows a person to move from uncertainty toward decision. That is why formatted reality often feels more trustworthy than raw reality. Not because it is always more true in an absolute sense, but because it is more usable at human scale. And usability has enormous psychological power. Human beings trust what they can work through. A system that can be read, followed, compared, and acted on starts to feel solid, coherent, dependable, real in a practical way. That is why order itself carries emotional force. A well-arranged panel calms the mind faster than chaotic process. A clear map feels safer than unmarked ground. A structured dashboard feels more manageable than the invisible complexity it stands in for. The interface does not eliminate uncertainty, but it organizes uncertainty into a shape the mind can inhabit. That is the key. People often trust what has been formatted because formatting makes reality feel inhabitable. This is why the old sky instruments mattered so much. They did not only measure the heavens, they reduced the distance between human beings and an overwhelming order. They took something vast and translated enough of it into circles, relations, and portable structure that a person could carry, consult, and trust. Modern interfaces do the same thing in more intense forms. The ancient user stood beneath the sky and consulted a tool. The modern user stands inside a world of systems and consults screens. Different materials, same structural need. But this is where the story becomes more mature and maybe more uncomfortable. Because every interface helps by leaving things out. That is the price of usability. Every map excludes details. Every dashboard filters process. Every chart simplifies. Every panel selects. Every model reduces. That does not make interfaces fraudulent. It makes them selective. And that means every interface is both a solution and a narrowing. This is the deeper tension human beings keep living with. We need interfaces because reality is too much. But every interface also teaches us to trust a reduced version of the world. And once that reduced version becomes familiar, it can start to feel more authoritative than the uncompressed reality behind it. That is one reason interface trust runs so deep. The interface is not just useful. It becomes a habit of perception. A person begins to think through it, judge through it, orient through it, act through it. Over time, the interface becomes less like a tool and more like the default surface through which reality is encountered. That is not uniquely digital. It is an ancient pattern, intensified by modern technology. Ancient people watched the sky, found recurrence, gave it form, and built tools. Modern people watch systems, extract signals, give them panels, and build dashboards. The movement is the same. Reality exceeds direct grasp. Pattern reduces fear. Form stabilizes pattern. Interface makes pattern actionable. That is the pattern this whole series has been tracing. Not just the story of one ancient object, not just the history of astronomy, but a long civilizational habit. Human beings repeatedly survive complexity by turning reality into systems they can read. That is the deeper meaning of interface trust. We do not trust interfaces only because they are modern. We trust them because they fit a very old human need. The need to bring overwhelming worlds into manageable contact. The need to act before total understanding is possible. The need to turn immensity into something the body, eye, and mind can live with. That is why a dashboard can feel more real in practice than the machine behind it. That is why a map can guide action more decisively than the land itself. That is why people often reach for the panel before the sky. Not because the panel is the full world, but because the panel is the world reorganized for use. And that may be the deepest insight hiding underneath the whole modern interface world. Not that we abandoned reality, but that we increasingly live through compressed versions of it. That is both a triumph and a limit. A triumph because without compression, complex life becomes harder to sustain. A limit because the more we rely on interfaces, the easier it becomes to forget that every interface is partial. Every interface reveals and conceals at the same time. It brings reality closer, but only by narrowing it into form. And yet human beings keep returning to that bargain because there is no civilization without it, no large-scale coordination without it, no reliable movement without it, no modern systems culture without it. Which means the real lesson here is not that interfaces are fake. It is that interfaces are powerful precisely because they sit at the meeting point of truth, reduction, and action. They are where reality becomes livable. That is why the pattern never disappeared. The first people who learned to trust the sky did not know they were beginning a habit that would one day fill the world with dashboards, screens, maps, and panels. But the structure was already there. Take what is too large to grasp. Find the order. Give it form. Build a surface. Trust it enough to live by it. The tools changed. The pattern did not. And once you see that, the modern world starts looking different. Not flatter, not simpler, but more legible. Because behind so many of the surfaces we trust, the same old civilizational move is still at work, turning reality into something human beings can finally bear to use.